invited you, and that was it.
All right, I'll be
Thank
gone
you.
now.
Thank you. And I'm going to start
My
again
work is done here.
right from the beginning. No. So anyway, we do philosophy. We discuss things. We talk, and nobody has to talk. But if you want to, you're very, very welcome. I always get something out of what people say. I always have, and I think that's what philosophy is about. There's somebody about to join us. Sharon is about to join us. So I see philosophy in a very, very wide sense. I see it as a more than a two-way street. I see it as a multiple-way street. That everything looks towards philosophy to explain what it is that one is studying or looking at, and that philosophy looks back to all other topics that contain it. We zoom in and out of everything that is around us. We zoom in and out of history, politics, the arts, science, mathematics, sociology. Everything is connected to philosophy. In fact, we can't do philosophy without looking at what it affects, such as things which you wouldn't really expect, like...
Can I interrupt you? I've lost the picture entirely. I tried to send a message just saying hi everybody, and somehow I've just gone and can just see Zoom now, and that's all.
But we can see you.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad you can see me. I'll try and find how to get the picture back.
Don't worry about it. We're not that interesting, but
oh, okay.
but you are being called Jan. You're very interesting.
Right. Thank you.
Not get.
Should I rejoin instead?
No, because then don't worry about it. Okay? Are you okay? You can hear us.
I can hear you. Okay, I'll go on talking to you. I am here.
I can see you. I can see you, Richard. I can see you.
I won't know who I'm talking to apart from you, though.
That's true. Don't worry about it. I'm the only interesting one here, anyway. No, it's a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah,
okay.
So,
everything we examine and we touch and shake just by looking at it. Flaubert once said that nothing could be boring if you looked at it for long enough. I'm not sure I actually agree with that. I think things could be extremely boring just by looking at them, but that's what he said. In my terms, I would say that nothing stays as it was, whether you look at it or not. I mean, and paradoxically, if you look at something, it doesn't seem to change at all. Think of a boiling kettle, which reminds me, Sharon has not appeared. One sec, sorry everybody. Sharon?
Yes.
Good.
I'm here.
Can you put your video on, please?
Sorry, I cannot. I just woke up.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about it.
That seems like a fair reason. Okay.
Yes, and I don't want to miss the discussion.
And
so I just joined right away.
You are so right. So in that case, we forgive you. We definitely forgive you. Don't do it again, though. but you.
I promise.
Can you see us?
Yes, I can see you guys perfectly.
Okay, great. In that case, fine. All right. So what I'm saying is that we don't have to, and I'm not being provocative here. We don't need to physically knock down a statue, and I don't mean particularly a statue. I mean anything that's there. We don't have to knock it down just to examine it. I think that by looking at it and talking about it, we can shake it. I think that physical destruction, apart from cancelling history, because it is history. Sorry about that, you two historians. I think that leaving it where it is has a better effect. I think that physical destruction panders to the basic instincts, really knocking things down. I find difficult, and I think that examination leads to better results. It's there, we can discuss it, we can discuss what's right and what's wrong. But to quote something that we've all heard, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And that's what we do here. We examine life. And Ken Robinson, educationalist, who died just a few days ago, he said, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. So there's no worry about anybody being wrong here, because I don't think there's anything wrong as such. It's just the way that you look at things. Okay, so some philosophers, well, many philosophers actually are difficult, and many of them are difficult because they use very difficult language, some of which is almost impossible to understand. Kant was one of them. He was German, but he used German. It was absolutely atrocious. And I was told that the only way you can understand him was actually translating it to another language. The reason, by the way, if anybody is interested, that's what I heard, that German was never used in that way before. It was either French or Latin. So he did it in German. It was absolutely awful. Nobody understood what he was talking about. I presume he did. Hegel, whose 250th birthday was just a couple of weeks ago, was notoriously difficult. And Bertrand Russell described him as the hardest to understand of the great philosophers. Heidegger made up his own words, because the stuff he was saying was so deep and oh, there's somebody else there. Lucky I saw that. Heron is coming in. He had to make up his own words so that at least
around their head with a baseball bat by shutting them down. And now they're opening.
Who's that?
He had some media playing, I'm sure.
Heron, hello.
Hi.
Could you put your video on, please?
Is this just getting started, or what happened?
You don't want me to start? No. You haven't missed anything important. It's just me introducing philosophy and why we're doing it and how we're doing it here. Oh, hi, Heron. It's
Yeah.
okay. You haven't missed the meaty part yet. The frightening things are still to come. So, so what I try to do, and which is the hardest part of my function, is I try to explain difficult notions in simple language. That's not easy. And so these are our talks. So hang on to your seats, because we are diving into metaphysics, and now and again we'll be coming up for air. I don't think it's difficult, but some of it is quite murky, and so hang on, because you're going to have a rough ride, some of it, mainly because I'll be arguing with everybody you've ever believed in. I will be arguing with, basically. Okay, so last month we discussed the other, and them and us. And so from that, we are moving from us and them to I, the self. Now, I'm not speaking about the self from a psychological point of view, because that's not my subject, okay? But we're speaking about it from a philosophical point of view. Now, it is a huge subject, and it's connected to consciousness and being. In order to do that well, I would have to speak for like a whole semester and go into it. So basically, I'm going to touch on certain points. I will mention a few philosophers just to show you that there is a connection. And if you want to look them up or whatever later, but it sort of places me within the concept of philosophy. A main function of the philosophical term has been to identify the core or essence of a human being, all right? As opposed to what might be accidental or contingent about him or her. In particular, by the way, the self has been identified with a human being's soul. Well, I don't know if anybody here is into that sort of stuff. I'm not, but I'm just mentioning that the soul is the supposed essence of the human being, as opposed to his or her body. Okay, the idea of the self, the actual term, came into currency in England, chiefly through the work of John Locke in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, etc. Okay, but so why are we talking about the self? I mean, we all know who we are basically, and what we are, and that we're here, and all that. But why? Well, how does it help? Somebody always asks me at some point, what's the point of what you're talking about? Okay, so I would say that to find out what we are and how we are is to find our position in the world, our place in relation to others and to things, objects. Now the self can only be I meaning I, and each one of you being the I. But I can only see it through I, and I'm not using me for a reason. Why is this important now, and why didn't people really talk about it before? Not before the 17th century, not in the way that we talk about it. The Greeks talked about it, but in a very different way, about the I, the person connected to the state, and it was politics, etc., but not in the way that we now talk about it, which is interesting from a historical point of view, but that there are fashions. There are fashions in philosophy. There are fashions, believe it or not, in science. It is the era of the person, of why is the person important. And speaking about that, George W. Bush's new book has just come out of his paintings, and it's called Out of Many, One. That's very nice, Out of Many, One. But I'm wondering if we should say out of one, many. Now I will go further into what I mean by that, but it's quite important. What I mean to say is, are we part of the world, or is the world part of us? So if you think of a line, if you zoom into that line, you will find that it consists of dots. The line is not something that's there. The more you zoom in, the more you find the dots. You zoom in to get to the points. Now, if that means anything to anybody, it might click that this is something that quantum physics talks about. These dots that are a point that is blurred and smudged. So last week we spoke about our relation to the other. This week is very, very different, because as Emmanuel Levinas says, as I mentioned last month, the importance of the other is at the core of what it means to be human. So you look at somebody else and you say, well, there it is, that's human. But I look at it differently. If Levinas says that we see ourselves through the other, I look at it differently. There is nothing outside being individually human. That's my thing. There's nothing outside of ourselves apart from the way that we look at how things are. It's not that we get something from somebody else. It's what we put out in the world, and that's the way we see it. So what I'm saying is, we see the world through us, not through somebody else, but the way we perceive it. So the world is inside us, not that we are part of the world. I have then a problem with the subject-object dichotomy, as does Bruno Latour, if anybody knows about him, but in a different way. He looks at it from a sociological point of view. I'm saying the object is not out there, but it is part of the subject. It's part of I. So it's not a matter of in here rather than out there, which is what is spoken about, something in here, or whether it's out there. I say that out there is a projection of I, and it's not a matter of in and out. It is I. Are you all with me?
Ron, I have a question.
Oh dear.
The way you were defining the self,
Yes.
like a fixed being object, whereas I would define the self as changing all the time, more like something floating down a river, being affected by outside things, never actually fixed.
I can see, Richard, you read my book.
No, we've argued occasionally. But
No, with this one,
I will read it when you send me a copy, a signed copy.
When you send me the money, I'll send you a signed copy with no extra for the signature. How's that? Is that fair?
That seems fair.
Okay. So that I have not got that far, but I will definitely say what you just said, that it is not fixed. Definitely not. It is, and I am coming to that. So thank you for that.
I'm sorry that I interrupted.
No, it's fine.
Before you carry on, I would like to ask you a question, if possible.
Yes, Augustine.
Yes. So my question regarding of what we said about Levinas, that the importance of the other is at the core of what means to be human. So basically, it's at the core of what means to be us. But also the idea that that actually the world is inside of us rather than us being in the world. What I'm wondering is, you are considering these two ideas are contradictory, or do they oppose each other from your point of view? And if so, why?
I find them contradictory. Although I do.
I don't.
Okay, fair enough. Now go on.
And I mean, so as probably Kant, I feel, as far as I understand him, he will say, we look the world, we all concept, we all knowledge from our perception that is individual, unique, and belong to us. So definitely, we see the world from our glasses that we cannot take off. But also, we can define ourselves by the way we see each other different from the others. And so that's why I believe you can find your definition of yourself in others as well as you can see from yourself.
Okay.
That is how anthropologists understand the concept of other. It's because it's different from you, it's because you recognize that it's different from you. But you can recognize it from your own perspective.
I won't go into that now because I think I'm going to cover it. Okay. I see your point, and it's there's a very fine line here that I think does separate us, but you'll see as I go on whether I answer what your point. And by the way, the whole point of my philosophy is that I don't, I will not even intimate that this is the way things are, because if I do that, I will shoot myself in the foot, because the whole point is that things are changing all the time. I can never tell you that this is the way it is. I just wouldn't do it. I'm just throwing forward some stuff and finding my way around it together with you. And we might come to some conclusion, and we might not. We might come to different conclusions, which always happens. But anyway, let me continue, and then you tell me if I'm doing it. It's a difficult point, that one. Okay, so So let's face it, it's always I that does and perceives and thinks and feels. It is nobody else. I don't know what you think or feel. I certainly don't know what you feel. I only know what I would feel if I were you. But I'm not you, I am me. Now that's a very important point of all my writings. That's basically inside there. Okay. Let me ask you a question. If I am being thought about and don't know it, this is like the tree in the forest, always bringing the tree. I love the tree in the forest. No, if I'm being thought about and I don't know, does it matter until if and when it affects me? I mean, does it matter? I mean,
Matter to who? Matter to what?
pardon?
Matter to who? Matter to what? What does matter mean?
The only one that counts is me, I. That's the only one that counts. If somebody thinks about me and I don't know about it, so what? It only makes a difference when I know that person is thinking about me or talking about me. All the rest of it means absolutely nothing. That doesn't exist. It's like that. It's like the tree in the forest, and nobody knows about it. I can't even ask you whether there's a tree. As soon as I talk about a tree, then in fact we know there is a tree. But we won't.
You're arguing about the limitations of one's own consciousness. We're arguing about the limitations of our consciousness. It makes it appear as though we're living in an idealist world. That's a conclusion you can come to, but it's not very rational at this point. I mean, surely you have to argue for it. Well, I'm intrigued to hear what you're going to say about in order to justify this consciousness from nothingness.
It's coming. It's coming. Don't worry. You've got another 3 or 4 hours. Don't worry. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. Anything that's mysterious at the end, you can ask. But it's a very it's a difficult topic. It is. This is not a ride through the park. Okay, we're doing a lot of metaphysics here, and your questions are very, very legitimate and good. All right, and I hope that I will cover them. And if not, then then we'll just discuss it anyway. So if we look in the mirror, we see ourselves as we think others see us, right? But we don't. What we're seeing is what we think others see when they see us. We have no idea what we look like in actual fact, because it's our subjective self looking at ourselves in some sort of circular thing and think, oh, well, my hair's good, I'm dressed well, I look pretty good, but I don't know what anybody sees. I think so, but it's completely and utterly subjective. I can't see any way of getting out of that. I cannot see how anybody can see me as I am. If there is such a thing as I am, the only thing that I am is the way I conceive of myself or perceive of myself as being, and that's problematic. I agree. We're in a bind. But just because things are difficult doesn't mean we're going to dismiss them. Hang on. I can see your hand, Frank. I can see it. Hang on. So, Frank.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you started off by saying that you cannot, you're not talking about the psychological side of self. But I don't see how you can divorce self from what you're talking about at the moment philosophically. Secondly, I don't see how you can divorce your subject from various religious topics. For instance, the Indians were the first to talk about the international universal I and the independent I.
Frank,
and I think from then it passed on to Europe.
Frank,
yes,
I'm coming to it. That's
okay.
why I'm stopping you. If I knew I wouldn't be getting there, I'd go on. But I am moving to religion. Don't worry. Spirit, it's all there. And when it isn't,
carry on.
Okay, so thank you anyway for
Right.
that. So we are we are treading close to the fraught topic of consciousness and being. In fact, I can't see any difference between consciousness and the self. I can't separate them. And I know that philosophers like to separate it. I don't see it. If I say that consciousness is I cannot possibly see how the self can be separate, since as far as I'm concerned, the self is everything. I know it's controversial. I wouldn't do this Zoom if I didn't think I'd say something controversial. You can hear things from other people that are not controversial or controversial in their way, but not in my way. So
you're an Oxford man. I think there was an Oxford philosopher who referred to either consciousness or the soul as the ghost in the machine.
I can't see who's talking.
It's Richard. It's me.
Oh,
Richard.
Richard, Jan Richard. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I know.
You probably remember. Is it not possible that consciousness, the I, is just, if you like, steam that's given off by a boiling kettle rather than being something that actually exists?
The problem with that is that you're saying there's a boiling kettle out there.
That's life, DNA, if you like.
Whatever it is, you're saying that something is out there that we can't get to. That's really there. Now, for those of you who heard the talk a couple of months ago about truth and objectivity, you will realize that I don't really go for that. I can't see how you could possibly think of, well, you can think of it, that there's something out there that we can't get to. That is completely untestable. And I don't go for untestables. To say that there is something out there, God or spirits or I don't know, whatever, steaming kettles and ghosts, and it's out there, but we can't get it. That's what's really there. And
the whole point is there is no ghost in the machine.
That's correct.
The machine exists without a ghost. Oxford doesn't exist. It's a collective of colleges rather than it's an idea, certainly, but as such, you've got individual colleges and that makes up what we call Oxford, the entity.
Correct. But
and with us, we're a collection of cells and so on, and it may be a useful fallacy for us to think of ourselves as being, but in fact we're just raw emotions, needs, various other physical things. Are we the only animals that think of ourselves as such, as self? Or does a dog think of itself? Does a cat? Does a fish?
There are no dogs or cats, right?
Within about 1.5 minutes, I'm coming to that very question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, no,
I'll stop interrupting.
No. Don't be sorry. It's fine. I just want to say, that's why I said in the beginning, if you ask something that I know I'm coming to, I will tell you, hang on. Okay, but do ask and thank you. They are all very, very good questions. So I'm inclined to treat consciousness, i.e. the self, as I do with the way I dealt with time, which is as a process to be understood, not as a thing to be defined. I am not saying what the self is. I don't think it's important. I don't think it's important to say what time is. I think it's important what time does to us. If I put ourselves, sorry, not ourselves, if I put I in the center, then what is important is what happens that I perceive, not what something is. So I'm not really interested as such about what I is. It's a process, okay? It's not, as Daniel Dennett says, an unfolding process as such, and neither is the self a product of something. It's not a product of consciousness. I say that The self is consciousness. And there's a huge difference here. There's nothing outside. The self is consciousness. There was nothing before the self, because that would mean that I'm looking for something outside. The self is consciousness. That's it. That's what we are. Everything bounces out from us for us to see it. That, I agree, is controversial, and I keep on telling you it is, because I know it is. But then, pardon?
What is consciousness?
I just said I don't want to tell you, because it's not important. I am the consciousness. I don't care what it is. Consciousness is X. Consciousness is a fairy at the bottom of my garden. Consciousness is something that's lying in my head or my shoulder telling me what to do. No, I don't care. Conscious, I am the consciousness, and I'm moving on to that. I'm moving gradually, bit by bit by bit. Don't worry, we will get somewhere at the end. Well, there is no end, but we will get to it. So, Heidegger talked about being in the world. Very, very, very important to it. While I talk about our individual being, whereas there are being. There's being because of my being. That is being, not the world. The world is in me. That's the difference. If that sounds mystical, it's not supposed to. I'm coming on to mysticism soon. The only thing that I know is that I exist. I'm not talking about Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I exist. No, I know that I exist, and you all know that you exist. I don't know that you exist, although I do, because I see you as existing. But it's only because I see you as existing. Your existence to you is the same as mine to me, but I don't know what that means at all. And I am not an idealist. I am not saying that things disappear when I don't look at them. I'm not. I'm saying that I am here, definitely. I know that. I know it. I don't have to think to know it. I know it. Okay, so now we come to self-awareness and animals. All of you who like animals. There are, as I mentioned, there are 2 or 3 things that when I talk about, the world explodes. One is free will. Everybody goes crazy. Everybody argues about free will. If I want to break up a party, all I need to do is say we don't have free will, and everybody starts screaming at each other, and the party's over. The same is if I say that animals don't think or something like that. Animal lovers go crazy. Of course they do. My tortoise, I can see my tortoise decides where it's going to go when it goes along. Okay, so I won't talk about animals and whether they're aware or not. So, self-awareness also means being aware of one day not being aware. And that's the dodgy part. I talked about that when I talked about nothing. Now, that is impossible. We cannot imagine not being here. That's where self-awareness stops. We're only aware that one day we won't be here because we know that others have disappeared. But our own self-awareness stops at that point. That's it. We can't think that far. So are animals aware of themselves? I don't know. Are they? Animal lovers will say yes. So it was a rhetorical question. I don't want you to all tell me that yes, your animals are. Now I'm going to ask, is an AI machine aware of itself?
No.
Hang on. Who said no?
I have to say no because it angers me.
What?
I said,
I have to. It's an emotional.
I knew I'm going to anger somebody. Is this about animals or about AI?
AI.
Okay,
People
hang on.
believe that AI.
Hang on. I'm asking the question, and then I'll ask the AI bloke to give his opinion. Hang on. I know everybody gets angry. It's okay. It's lovely to be angry. That's the wonderful part about this Zoom thing. People get angry, but it's okay. It's fine. It's good. That's philosophy. Okay. So, so I asked, is an AI machine aware of itself? I ask, can it be programmed to be aware of itself?
Ron,
And would that include being aware of it one day not existing? And now, if I may ask, Terry, do you have, as you are an AI bloke, can those questions be answered?
I think there is answerability to those questions. First of all, if I could ask, I was intrigued why, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name, but why was he angry about the issue about AI? Because I found that fascinating, if you could comment.
Mark.
My name is Mark. Can't find you wherever you are. People have this very firm idea that artificial intelligence is not only inevitable, I mean, that it's real, that it can be real. It must be possible, but the consciousness is somehow a machine of some sort, any sort, some sort can be conscious. I think there's a fundamental formula, an argument that is unbreakable, that can prove absolutely that perpetual motion machines cannot exist, and there is. And I think there's a similarly unbreakable formula that says that machines cannot be conscious. I just haven't written it down yet or thought of how to express it, but I'm certain of it. So people believe that consciousness in machines is inevitable. I know it's impossible. That's all.
Okay, that's an interesting. In some ways, in part going back to the questions that Ron was asking, you can absolutely program a computer to behave in any fashion you want that emulates self-preservation, self-conservation, goals of trying to keep itself into existence. That's done all the time. I mean, that is a fundamental part of how to program a robot.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, and what is intriguing though is there's a separate question that, and I think I might be agreeing with you on this point, is that I understand computers and computer algorithms well enough that I see no entry point by which the thing that we could call qualia would be one of the points, a very specific point I would point at. I see absolutely no opportunity in what I know of computers for qualia to enter in. And I would propose that if you can't propose qualia, if you can't say that a computer can see red, in fact, if you can demonstrate that a computer absolutely cannot see red, that even though we don't know what red is, there's just no entry point for a computer to have the sensation of red. It means that we can't seriously contemplate that computer being conscious, because you have to get kind of at least that basic of this aspect that we consider part of our fundamental existence. But I think most people would agree that if you don't have qualia, the whole idea of saying that I am aware of my circumstances just sort of loses its meaning, at least to me. Now, but the flip side of that is I would say we need to be very careful about saying that no machine can ever do that, because ultimately at the cellular level, we are talking about machinery. I mean, there are things that are going on in cells that they are doing things, they're doing little processes. So they're not fundamentally totally different from the domains that we can access with technology. So, you know, the bottom line is you can create cells, and if cells can be conscious, then in some fashion, you can create things that potentially could access us. I think this is just an entire domain of science that we don't know squat about. That I think genuinely science knows so little about this area that they're just making wild guesses. So,
I have two questions.
but I don't think it's the same thing as saying you can't get there, and that's why
you
we're
can't get
very,
there.
very cautious.
Right.
I would like to ask first, does intelligence inevitably lead to consciousness? Because
No,
I think you can have an intelligent
say
machine
not.
without an eye, maybe. And also, I've been retired some time, but I seem to remember that, I think it was Berkeley, there were some investigations into using biological computers. I don't know whether that went on, because since I've retired, I've given up bothering to look at the latest AI research. And my area was natural language anyway. But I would say intelligence does not always need to consciousness, and the future of AI could lead to intelligent machines, although it wasn't there then. I mean, it's still algorithms, it's still basically programming machines, but with neural networks, connection ideas, you do get learning machines. I don't think you get any machines that can actually lie, and I think that would be an essence of a machine actually thinking, if you like, for itself. It would be able not to make a mistake. And I mean, you can have programming mistakes, you can have errors in data, but to have a machine that could deliberately dissemble. But if you get that, you've got a thinking machine that's independent of the program. And by
in my view, intelligence is a product of consciousness, and in every case, consciousness must precede intelligence. It depends on your definition of intelligence. I mean, I can build a machine that can just, it's godlike, do everything, right? And it seems, as far as I'm concerned, it's far more intelligent than you and me and anyone else. But that's just a form of words. So, but when it comes to consciousness, I'm not going to be loose with that word. To me, the idea of consciousness and intelligence is that consciousness must precede intelligence in my scheme.
Now, on the issue of intelligence, and I think agreeing with what several people have said, I would absolutely say that you can have forms of intelligence that do not require what we think of as self or as consciousness today, simply because you can design even simple mechanical devices that produce, if you define intelligence simply as being able to process through a situation and come out with some kind of a favorable result, which living organisms do all the time, but also you can make machines that do that. So I think I would be cautious about ascribing intelligence itself as being in any way equivalent to self and consciousness the way we are. I would make some.
Yes, I should be cautious, and I probably did the wrong thing to say that, but it's a starting point for me. I'm sorry, Ron. It's a starting point for me, and it is a little. It's arguable. It's computational in some sense. So yeah, fair enough. Depends what you mean by, as I said, by intelligence. So of course, yes. Okay. But I just think consciousness is absolutely fundamental. You can't have qualia without consciousness. Consciousness and qualia are almost the same thing. If you want to be a panpsychist about it.
Well, okay. Rebecca, did you want to say something? You look very enthusiastic.
I would.
Go ahead. Yeah. No, I'm scribing here in the chat. Yeah, usually you guys have moved on before, and I'm still contemplating the thought previous. But actually, I can say that, I believe we have and I don't know this, but I believe we have the ability to create like people with human DNA production. And correct me if I'm wrong. And then now we're also, so that's kind of like, to me, the heart piece of it, the flow of the blood, whatnot. And then we also have the ability to create computer technology. If you combine those two sciences, seems to me that you could create some type of life form. But now he's got me thinking here about like the rights and stuff. So I've actually moved on in my head, but thank you for opening it up, the space for me. Yeah.
The rights issue.
Sorry, Terry. Yes, go on.
Well, no, I was just saying the rights issue is fascinating and tricky. And when we're talking about biological beings, I have no qualms that another biological being, including not just humans but mammals in general, they feel pain, they have consciousness, they should have rights. Computers, it can get very tricky in the following sense, that you can make a computer that is so convincingly like an adorable animal or an adorable whatever you might choose, that your heart just breaks for the thing, even though it has zero. We can be talking about incredibly minimal circuitry, not even a full computer, can produce emulations that nonetheless tug at your heartstrings and make you feel like, oh, absolutely. And of course, people do that just with their cars. And it's not, in a sense, it's not that different. People get very attached and they ascribe a certain amount of humanity to objects that they know darn well are inanimate. Computers just make that situation much worse. So it gets tricky.
But the car doesn't feel.
The car does not feel, and neither do these simulations that are so persuasive. And that's where I think the computer technology can get quite dangerous into leading us into a path where we see something, it persuades us to do something. In fact, if you look at the bots on the internet, this is happening right now because bots essentially are doing exactly that for malicious purposes. They are persuading they're triggering your anger, they're getting your emotions. They're programmed to do that. They behave like people. People think they are people, which should be a felony. You should not, it should be a felony to create a robot that pretends to be a human, because that is the ultimate degradation of what it is to be human to me.
Would you punish
My granddaughter has a toy cat, and the toy cat meows and pees and cries, and my granddaughter is convinced that it's a real cat.
Yes.
And she loves it, and she goes to sleep with it. So, I mean, at a certain stage in your life, I suppose, you could accept it as being real.
Right, and now we skip along. I'm sure we're going to get back to that at some point, but we've covered animals and computers, and nobody's stormed out yet, which is good. So, back to the self. We want others to be like we think they should be. Something very interesting in the US. An atheist has never been president. Now, and only once, and for only one term, there was ever a declared atheist in Congress. He was Pete Stark from Californian Congressman. He was the only one who ever declared he was an atheist. It's very, very interesting. You can declare any sort of belief, but non-belief you can't declare. Now I find that amazing. So while
humanists?
What?
Have there been any humanists or agnostics then? You say there have been no atheists, but have there been agnostics or humanists?
I don't think that anybody would have dared to say it. Everybody, from what I see, everybody is religious. Everybody pretends that they believe in stuff. So my point is, so that while believers believe that God gave us free will, right? And they discriminate against atheists, right? The atheists who've got free will to not believe, they don't want. So where does the free will come in? So they would rather vote for any color, religion, etc., but not for a non-believer. Now that is really, really strange.
Ron, I wish I could.
Sorry.
Terry.
I wish I could dispute you, but from what I've seen from the U.S., at least from my perspective, both Midwestern and East Coast, and being heavily involved with the federal government for decades, what you said is exactly correct. I am not aware of a single case of someone declaring. Now, that doesn't mean they're not an atheist. I would argue that our current president is probably an atheist in terms of actual belief. But that's hard to tell, because that's not what you're going to ever hear. But in terms of actual pragmatic analysis of behavior modes, I would say it seems extraordinarily unlikely. But it is a curious, I don't know if that's true for other countries. Maybe other people could comment on that. It might be true for Canada, I'm not sure. But it is an oddity about the US. Yes?
I'd like to add something historically here. The French Revolution, which was based on freedom, equality, fraternity, etc., they created a new religion which was called atheism. The whole religion of the French Revolution in its first years was based on the idea of first of atheism and then on rationalism, and they got rid of God. And that wasn't so long ago.
And of course, it didn't work out that well, because then by the end, the atheists began forming essentially a priesthood. It was one of the most amazing things to watch the progression of supposedly the atheistic view actually becoming a religion, and which you could argue has been repeated.
But on the other hand, but on the other hand, France was one of probably the first country in Europe to really separate religion from politics.
Yes, but they had a hard time of it. A lot of that didn't go real well. So,
of course, we sent
Question?
all our religious people over to America.
well,
And that left a whole lot of imperialists here.
I do actually think the American situation directly responded to the French Revolution, in the sense that we were following very similar routes, and there was great enthusiasm for a while. But then at some point, they saw what happened in the terror, and people in the U.S. said, we don't want to go that route. And I think it actually had a moderating effect on the American psyche when they realized just how badly the French Revolution went amiss.
Bill,
yes.
Bill, you wanted to say something?
I did. The notion that consciousness is a core for our ability to interpret our world. Would you agree with that? Consciousness equips us to interpret our lives, yes? We project whatever we project based on our awareness of the world. If that's true, isn't all of this discussion about self or other, seeing ghosts in a machine or not, looking at behavior or looking at people who are animated by other forces, myths of religion, all a function of our ability to project our interpretations on the world? Isn't that what it is? Are we talking about comparative interpretations of our lives, not the question of whether they exist in fact, but whether we interpret them in a certain way?
No, it's a very good point. I sit up straight as soon as I hear "exist in fact." I don't know what that means.
It's an interpretation. It's a way we behave in relationship to evidence. We assume it's a fact and we behave as if it is, even though we interpret it, well, we can't be sure that it's true or not, or exists or not. We act as if it is, and acting as if is the essence of consciousness.
Yes.
That was Friedrich Nietzsche's point in Beyond Good and Evil, to be honest. That we project our values and impose those on and sort of make up the philosophy afterwards. We make up our world after we already project our values. Yeah,
I think that's fair. And Bill, yes, in a way, yes. But as soon as you allude to facts and things as they really are, that's where I stop. All that is untestable. And if we talk about, as you said, Mary, the way that we interpret things, the way that we what you're basically saying, that we're making things up. It's one way of putting it. I mean, because if there's nothing outside the eye, then there's nothing I can't talk about ghosts in the machine. I can't talk about things that really are, as Kant did. I mean, the things that really are, you look at things, that's not the way they really are, but behind them somewhere is the real thing. And I don't go for that. I can't see how you can talk about a real thing that you can never get to, and i.e. is untestable. So somewhere along the line, I'm with you, Bill, except your allusion to what things really are. And that's right. Where I stop, because I can't get to that.
Well, I'm just saying, my recollection of Kant is that we have certain constructions that we throw out there, and we equip us to understand causation, disjunction, and alternative ways of looking at the world. Whether there's a reality behind it, he almost dismisses as irrelevant. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Well,
I don't think Kant dismisses it as irrelevant. He says that's what there really is out there that we can't get to. What we see is only our perception.
Yes.
but what he means, and in fact says it, that although we can't get to it, somewhere is the real thing. And
Why is that?
And that's what I disagree with, because that's untestable. There's no, he said it because he basically couldn't get anywhere else, with all due respect to Kant and Kant followers.
I'm not trying to be cute, but
Ron.
saying, isn't that just another interpretation?
No.
Yes.
Well, for Kant, I don't, the reason that in the first critique, in the Critique of Pure Reason, is he calls it the transcendental unity of apperception. And for Kant, when he says the word transcendental, he asks himself simple question: what are the necessary conditions for even this experience even to occur? So this unity of the self would have to be the case in order even to have an experience, even to have consciousness, whatever that is. You would have to have something there even before you have an experience. So that's why he calls it the transcendental unity of apperception. That's my understanding, at least. Maybe you guys can explain a little bit more.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
I don't, of course, but there's lots of stuff that I don't agree with. But I can't go for words and concepts that are untestable. It's no point telling me that somewhere behind the tree is the real tree that we can't see, and that's just perception. I can't go for it. It doesn't make sense to me.
So what's the alternative?
Okay, wait. And I agree with Ron. I agree with Ron. Empirically speaking, and I think you're saying just stick to your empirical guns, and that's fine. But Kant wants to kind of push that idea that, look, when we make transcendental arguments, for example, and these transcendental arguments he calls a priori, in one sense, that, just ask yourself, what would have to be the case? Like, for example, a contradiction occurs. Then you say, it can't be that case. So when you deal with, for example, let me just give a rough example. When Kant thinks about transcendental, and he thinks about like a little bit like transcendental arguments, how they work, it's like this, when a detective kind of asks a perpetrator, where were you at the night of 9:00 p.m.? If the guy has a legitimate place where he's been, then, and if the murder occurs at a certain place, and if he's not at that place, then he removes the possibility that he is the perpetrator, because an object cannot be in two distinct locations at the same time. So because of rules of logic of what we understand space and time, you remove those possibilities. So what Kant is kind of thinking, in one sense, there has to be some self, although we don't empirically know what is its color, what is its shape. We say there something must be. That's kind of how I understand it. Maybe you guys can.
Doesn't quantum physics say you can be at two places at the same time?
Well, I think about it, if I could just chime in, I think about it as energy, and energy only changes forms. It doesn't go away, so if I think a lot in terms of alternative universes and reincarnation, different lives that we have, and it's our soul essence, our energy continues on over time through these different experiences. However, the experiences that we're having, this external stimuli that we're reacting to, is what appears for us to be changing. But it's our soul essence. That's the ego and the id and the subconscious and unconscious. That whole dichotomy of our eternal existence, our eternal energy versus this temporary stuff that we're going through every day, every minute, every second, if you will, every lifetime.
Rebecca, I noticed when you use that terminology, there is a difference in meaning in the term energy. And I think I saw this on the chat earlier. When physicists use the term energy, they have a very specific meaning of something is actually absolutely persistent. In that sense, it's the same. It endures. And the endurance of energy, of mass energy, is one of the fundamental precepts of the universe. But it is also incredibly simple and loses information. There is, however, other aspects of physics, quantum physics, where, for instance, the concept of information does not disappear, but is not the same thing as energy. So there is, in fact, that is actually, you hear these controversies about black holes. They're all about information. The idea that that the black hole could erase information horrifies physicists because they consider it one of the fundamental precepts of that. So I'm just saying I think there's a terminology difference that often when people are trying to express something like what you're saying, you use the word energy, but you're talking about something actually much more interesting from a viewpoint of physics. Physics absolutely encompasses greater complexity in this, like I say, the idea that information is persistent. In fact, that might even be one alternative. Information, the essence, well, that is one of the theories of physics, that information cannot be erased. Not even a black hole is allowed to erase it. So, so again, the terminology can get interesting. They can acquire different meanings. But I could mention that too. If you mention it to a physicist, you will get a different reaction for that reason, though, because they'll think you're talking about energy like a light bulb, and they'll immediately say, "Well, that just it changes forms, but it doesn't have any persistence. It has no memory to it," which is correct. But the memory part is a separate issue, and that if you say it in the right way, the physicist will say, "Oh yeah, yes, the information stays." The information persists. So then you have, so it was interesting that you mentioned that, though. I just wanted to bring that
up. I think about the wavelength, how it's a wave and also a particle at the same time, the proton, neutron, and I don't know the right terminology.
You don't need to.
Yeah,
you don't need to. I mean, what Rebecca is saying is very, very, very straightforward. Assume that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And then your energy, then you cannot be created or destroyed, right? So then, there has to be something that continues, right? But what is puzzling about this view, Rebecca, this little bit, is that how do you distinct this I from another I? Are we both energies? Am I you? Are you me? How can we keep those things distinct?
I need to. I think, Mary, you wanted to say something, right?
I just wanted to throw one thing in here. I know nothing about physics, but I heard an interesting comment by Max Tegmark, the physicist, saying that he believed that one of the reasons we have this illusion of self to begin with is the one thing that is persistent is the pattern that the quarks take that form our human bodies versus, I think his example was versus a watermelon. And that since that pattern of the quarks remains constant while our cells are changing, that somehow propagates this notion of self, which seems and appears constant.
I shall be mentioning him in about 10 minutes, by the way, because I have regarding energy and all that. It would be best for me to keep quiet, because what I'm going to say is going to annoy those who believe in energy. And Rebecca, please forgive me, but I'm not a great energy person. I mean, I believe in energy, it's great. But when you talk about we continue, who do we continue for? What does it mean? Of course we don't continue. We're dead, we're dead. What does it mean? I mean, it's very nice. It's very nice to think that we're immortal and energy continues, but what will it do for you? For you when you're dead? I don't mean you personally. I mean anybody.
I guess I try to not worry too much about the why, because I feel like it's more about presence. And this gets into some of the Eastern religion stuff, and just being and existing. So I don't know. I don't know if we need to know why, or if there needs to be a purpose. And this is where I was talking before, like the flower and the purpose of the flower. It's not wondering why it exists. It's beautiful, and there's not some final destination. I don't know if we need to have purpose as much as we just need to enjoy or be happy, like in the moment. And I'm not saying this right at all, because I don't really know. I'm not really clear on my own thoughts on it, so I'll stop.
No, I'm all for happiness. It's great. I mean, I would never talk against happiness. It's wonderful, but the point is, to be happy, you have to be alive. When you're when you are energy, you will not be happy, and we would never know anyway. I mean, to me that's untestable stuff, and I don't talk about mysticism because it's not my thing, and people do, and they feel it's good because they're going to be immortal, but they're not. I mean, unless
well,
you're
there's dharma also. There's dharma, dharma is this idea that we have this that every person's existence has some benefit to humanity, and if we can identify what that is, then everyone's living in this system, this cohesive system where people are individually, I mean, it's much about individual talent and individual natures, but I have a difficult time separating religion and philosophy. And I say that with all religions involved. Like, I don't know enough about science and I don't know enough about religion. And I don't think those are probably to me the most fascinating or important pieces of knowing how to philosophize in a logical manner. So I'm just tapping the surface on some of this stuff myself.
No, we're all on the surface.
Everyone, yeah.
We're all on the surface. So I need to ask a question because this seems to be coming up at the time. Are we who we say we are, or are we what others say we are, or whichever one we go for? The notion of a true self is an oxymoron. What is it? What is the true self, for crying out loud? How could we possibly know? I mean, I don't know what your true self is. How do I know what my true self is when the whole thing is all I have is to rely on is what I think of what my true self is, and I wouldn't recommend you all to look for the true self. You might be disappointed with what you find. Anyway, that was a joke. For Sartre, existentialism is united in its complete subjectivity. Just sort of mentioned that we are, he says, what we choose and what we experience. To which I say no. Sorry, I have to argue with all the philosophers. Otherwise, what's the fun? No, we are what we experience, yes. And we can take from that experience, of course. But we don't choose what we experience, do we? After all. But what we experience is filtered into our memory and comes out as a different memory. A different memory to other people's memories who were at the same place at the same time. So where is the experience that's connected to anybody else's experience? We certainly don't choose it. We don't choose what we remember, right?
Isn't it all parallax?
Pardon?
Isn't it all parallax? The idea that if you're looking at something, say a building or a cathedral or something, then wherever you stand, you'll have a different view. So everybody is standing around looking at, I don't know, a cathedral, and they all see different views of this. But does that building really exist at all? And I mean, I would query, and I suspect you would, that there is anything that is actually real. There is only our perception. In other words, we invent what we think we see. So therefore, there is possibly nothingness at the root of everything.
The interesting thing is, from an AI viewpoint, I would agree wholeheartedly with what you just said, because we have to actually worry about programming a computer to do what you just said. It is not trivial. It is not easy. It is difficult to take all those different perspectives and synthesize from them the idea of a cathedral. It's much, much easier for every single viewpoint to say, that's my viewpoint, that's my viewpoint, that's my viewpoint, that's reality, that's reality, that's reality. So it is hard to pull those threads together and come up with this idea of a cathedral. Similarly, it is hard for the entity, the robot, whatever it is, to synthesize what it's doing and come up with the idea that I am a robot, I have a purpose. These are interesting, complicated things. They're not trivial, they're not easy. And if you have to actually try to program them, it just emphasizes that much more. That yes, in a sense, every different viewpoint is absolutely always going to be that different viewpoint. it's how you synthesize those together and how you put them together. It gets very, very interesting and very hard to explain sometimes why it is the way it is.
Yeah. So actually, regarding memory, we have an additional difficulty, which is memory is not always the same. It's an organic process. So actually, your memory of your cathedral today is not the same tomorrow. Yes. So it's not even that we've got different viewpoints. It's also that when I see the cathedral and I retain in my memory, and I saw the cathedral before yesterday, I remember yesterday, but today when I think about the cathedral, I'm a different self. So actually the memory is different. So reality becomes much more complex in that sense, because we're not talking about the self now, but we're talking how the self think of itself in the past, and that's changed.
Correct. You read my book as well then, Augustine.
I haven't got it yet, but
no, you have to.
We all intend to.
Yeah, I know, I know, but
but I had a hard course on neuroscience recently.
Oh,
we have a huge about memory and what's fascinating.
Oh no, you've got to read what's in the book about memory, and then that will make you go crazy. But no, but seriously, everything that you've been saying, I've put down, and false memories and everything else. Frank?
How do you relate to memory? How do you relate to the aid of a photograph?
I can't.
If you take a photograph of
your sound is very bad. I can't hear you.
Reaction to something which is theoretical.
I didn't.
Can you hear me now?
A bit better.
Can you hear me?
Can you say it again? Yes.
Yeah. I'm saying, how do you relate to a photograph as a form of memory? There you get a memory which is frozen. Surely, even though you're interpreting the photograph through your own perception, nevertheless, you have the cathedral, which you don't have at different angles. You have a set picture of a set cathedral, which is an aid to memory.
No, you don't.
So actually, a photograph can lie your memory, can make it difficult for you to remember, because when you look at the picture, I mean, it may evoke your memory. That's true. It may evoke your memory, but the more you look at the picture, the more you remember the picture rather than the event.
But you know there's a cathedral. If you see the cathedral, you know there is a cathedral.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But how is that cathedral actually? How tall is the cathedral? How tall is the cathedral? How big is it? Those are things that change. Where it was?
But it
Where
isn't
exactly was in that town?
It isn't a cathedral. It's a picture of a cathedral. Morris.
I'd like to ask a question, just to take this away a little bit from the cathedrals, to something else. Maybe somebody can help me with this. I'm struggling with the idea of self in mental illness and in the use of psychedelic drugs. With certain mental illnesses, the understanding of self is very distorted. And how can we look upon the self of a, for instance, a schizophrenic or somebody who has just used LSD, for instance, or some other mind-altering drug, their self is the same self as it was before, or is not the same self. When the schizophrenic episode is over, the self returns to what it was. I find a lot of difficulty with this. Maybe somebody can help me.
I'm going to come to that in about 5 minutes. Okay.
I think the self is different, but it's different from yesterday as well. You don't need a psychedelic trip to be different. It's different. Myself was one way before this conversation. Will be another. Because
Can we hold that can we hold that for 5 minutes, as I'm about to come to it? Okay, and that's thing. So there is something that people say like, I am what I am, and that's it. That's what people. I am what I am, but it's a tautology, and it's a seemingly vacuous statement, but is it? It is circular, and that is the point, I think. It is a circle around us, enclosing us within our subjectivity. It's a microcosm of the human situation. It's restrictive, but it's real. I am what I am because I can't be anything else than what I am. It is the road not taken. Everybody thinks this is great, but the road not taken doesn't mean anything whatsoever. There is no road not taken. There is only one road that you've taken. There are an infinity of roads not taken. So by saying the road not taken and doing poetry about it, which is very nice, but not philosophical at all, because you're talking about fate, etc. The road not taken is absolutely meaningless. I am what I am, but of course I am. I can't be anything else than what I am. Here I am, if you see what I mean. Do I get excited about this? Yes.
As a bad poet and a worse philosopher, I would say that poetry and philosophy are totally different. And you're talking in metaphors. You're talking about maybe a truth, but not the same thing as science. You're not trying to, or philosophy, where you are trying to get to use logic and rationality to work out problems rather than to express emotions. If there is such a thing as a duality, the duality to me is between rationality and emotion. And I guess the same self can have both. You can at one moment try and get your mind to think logically and consider a problem. And another time you can express what you feel about something. So therefore, the road not taken as a metaphor comes across to us all quite clearly. We know what it means, but yes, philosophically, there are millions of roads, there are trillions, or, there's an infinite number of roads that we don't take.
What I can say to that is that all language is a metaphor. Everything we say is standing for something else. So when
That's why you have to use logic probably to get to truth.
You mentioned the word truth.
Well, okay. Truth will tend to be a tautology, I agree, in logic, but you have to use maths and logic rather than language. Language is something to express ourselves. We try to take out the emotion when we're talking, arguing about things. But it's always there, I agree. And metaphor is the underlying construct of language.
Okay, we talked about mysticism and Rebecca, so this might interest you. I don't want to anger you again, but I mean, what can I do? I have to anger somebody. So I'm asking, is self an illusion? Because a lot of people say that self is an illusion. So Sam Harris, as you know, is a neuroscientist. He's a scientist, and yet he'll talk about science, but on the other hand, he's a complete and utter mystic bloke. He will talk about mysticism like there's no tomorrow. And this is the person who travels around the world talking for atheism and against religion, but really going around the world doing it. And yet he will say straight to your face that meditation is losing oneself. Now, I admit I've never done it. I've never done meditation. I think I was probably too cynical to do it. It's possible, but I don't understand how you can lose yourself and how you would know that you've lost yourself. How can you know not knowing? At what point do you not say to yourself, I am not here? I mean, how do you do that? Now, if
Can I say
somebody,
something?
hang on 1 second. If somebody comes out of it and tells me, and they have, that when I was in meditation, I lost myself. And then they throw in my face, I don't know it because I haven't tried. So I say, well, can you please tell me when you actually lose yourself? He says, well, I can't. I said, well, then what, where are we? Where does all this happen? How do you lose yourself and know that you lose yourself? Because you can't know that you lose yourself. Sorry about that. Yes.
Can I say something? Because I listened to Sam Harris's guided meditations as well as Joseph Goldstein's, et cetera. And I think the point is, and I can't really speak for, the point is when you're meditating, it's not some mystical thing. It's really just realizing that the difference between, say, your raw sensations of tingles or heat in your hands or your body, that hand is a concept you impose upon those sensations. It's an abstraction. And Sam Harris's, from what I interpret him saying, is that self too is an abstraction for the internal dialogue that we hear. And I think that he means it is a different concept from a psychological one, is the self is that leitmotif that threads together our disparate drives, which is more of a Jungian thing. I think that self is different. You know, so you lose yourself in realizing that self is the abstraction, just like hand or face or head is an abstraction. That's all.
Okay.
Can I have a comment here?
Yeah, of course.
So I do meditation. So the idea of meditation, as I understand it, is before we harbored this language skills, our language center, like when we were in the savannas and we didn't have languages. So when we sat and looked around us, what were our thoughts before? Because now if you sit still, and even in meditation and start, the thoughts will rush in, but they're all coming from your language center. They come as sentences. So before that, what happened? What did we think about before the language center? So in meditation, you go into phases. First, you master calmness of your body. Then you master your emotions, and then your thoughts, which comes from that language center. And the idea is to take you back to that time when you had no language. What was your original thoughts as a human without languages? That's what I understood from meditation.
I think that language is that whole, like Julian Jaynes had a theory which you know, thought that the whole notion of consciousness came up with the development of language, and that's when I and me were first put into our mindset. And that Julian Jaynes suggested that, but you know, right as we were transitioning from having this you know, state of not being conscious because of language to a state of being conscious, that when we first started hearing the internal dialogue, we didn't know what to make of it, and we actually thought it was the gods talking to us. And then we transformed.
I would argue that actually the brain developed because of language, and we developed language because of survival. In other words, to point out there was a herd of antelope, or there was a pride of lions or something, or there was a poisonous fruit, or there was a good fruit, fig tree was coming right. And once language developed, because it is so complicated, our brains had to develop with it. So therefore it was a continuous process. Language developed, brain developed. Language develops more, brain develops more. So therefore, I don't think we would have had thoughts before we had language. Language and thought is tied together. But that's only my own idea.
Right, but we still communicated. Sorry, my mouth is full.
I disagree. Like, we hunted, we gathered. There had to be thoughts. There had to be planning.
Yep.
We picked our mates. We loved. So we had all those emotions and planning before languages. I don't think we had nothing before languages. We would have died.
Do chimpanzees love as such?
This is extremely interesting, and now I'm going to annoy everybody, I think. everybody's talking about what happened before we, and this is absolutely speculative. I mean, I don't understand where it comes from, apart from the fact that you think it's a good idea that will have happened because that's where we are now, the road taken. But I mean, it's absolutely speculation, and evolution, as great as it is, and it explains everything where we are in the road that we took, is only seen retrospectively. We cannot use evolution, as far as I know, to tell us what's going to happen. We can only look at evolution to tell us what happened. And that is the point that I've been making all the way through, and you hit the nerve, that you are now speculating from within yourselves about how you imagine things happening, and you've convinced yourself that that is science. And as you move yourself back, you'll keep on proving that it's science because it worked. Now, dinosaurs are changing all the time. Every time you open a paper, you see that dinosaurs were different. They were colored, some were big, some were small. They weren't like that last year. When I was a schoolboy, we went to Science Museum, whatever, and we saw dinosaurs. They're completely different now. How is that? I mean, did we discover new dinosaurs? Of course we didn't. We discovered in here what we thought dinosaurs might be according to the way that we think of the world. That's exactly the point I'm making about the self. And we're all the time making things up. They might be right, and I don't like the word, they might not be right, but they're okay because they satisfy us. And that's what life is. We're satisfying ourselves by making up this stuff. How many people?
Well, they did discover fossils.
Well, actually,
don't start me on fossils. Don't start me on fossils, okay?
Although I agree entirely in the idea that actually evolution is seen as a retrospective thing, that we actually have to look back and then forward, and we cannot use evolution to predict how we're going to move things in the future, regarding of even we know what our conditions are. That's true. But we have nowadays in the present examples of minds that think and have mental processes without language. For example, all the children that are autistic, they have a lot of complex mental processes, and most of them, they don't have language, and they still think. So actually, yes, I agree with Sana in the term of, I don't know if meditation is the way to achieve mental processes before languages, but definitely there are. We can see that we have proven experience that there's mental.
I think the idea of the necessity for language to facilitate, of the necessity of language to facilitate thought, to me seems ridiculous. I doubt as philosophers, we should be doubting ourselves. We shouldn't be too eager to embrace what we think to be the case. That's the way I see it. But this idea that language is so fundamental to thinking seems absurd to me. Now, I don't know what I'm missing, but I mean, surely we all think in concepts, and concepts are then described by this invented language so that we can convey it to other people. But prior to inventing the language to convey to other people what our concepts are, the concepts, are they not? Goodness me.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. Well, I could agree with that, but sorry, just one second. But although it is important for other people, like we are thinking all together right now, and that is very necessary languages. So although I agree on the terms of that, I mean, language is vital for thinking in terms that we are.
No, well, not to me. Maybe I could be delusional about this. I had a philosophy lecturer once who said that he thinks in language, and I thought, no, you don't. No one does. They just think that they do, because when you describe, you can describe reality, but the description is not the reality you describe. Neither is language. which is a description of the concepts that you formulate and function with, that is not they are not the concepts themselves. Just like artificial intelligence, I mean, the programming, the algorithms, etc., and the emulations are of the thing that is emulated. They are not the thing itself. They cannot be, and it's the same with reality as well. I had my hand up earlier, Ron, because I wanted to respond to your comment on, if you don't mind, on meditation. I too have not done meditation, and I too have always been sort of pretty skeptical about how can it be meaningful. But I took exception to what you said about, but I assume that I'm wrong. I assume that there is really something going on there. I mean, the claim is there, it's everywhere, so I assume it's true. And then I try and make sense of something that I haven't had a direct experience with. But I can tell you that there's no proof that I fell asleep last night. In fact, I didn't, but anyway, the night before. But I believe I did. The proof of it would be I would have witnessed my moment of transitioning from consciousness into unconsciousness. I've never experienced that moment. Neither have you. No one is aware of the moment they lose consciousness, and yet they know for certain that they did every night. Surely.
Yeah, we're all sure about what happened. We're never sure about what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with what Lucas is, with Mr. Mark Lucas is saying. You know, there's some phenomena called dreamless sleep. And it seems to me, if there is a state called dreamless sleep, then it doesn't seem we're conscious, yet we wake up. So it seems like there's a distinction between the self and consciousness, because this phenomena called dreamless sleep.
Can anybody tell me when they actually go through that?
When we don't dream.
Yeah, I'm just asking a provocative question. It's
under general anesthetic.
Dreamless sleep. You'll say, I woke up and I didn't dream. But there are lots of people who say they don't dream and actually do. And it can be seen on machines. I mean, yeah, I dream all the time. I mean, all the time. When other people... Okay, I don't. But I think I do. No, really fair enough.
No, I'm really, really sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I'm really, really genuinely sorry.
Don't be sorry for anything, especially on this Zoom thing. Nobody needs to be sorry. It's possible that you're right, that I don't. I feel that I'm always dreaming, even when I'm awake, but that's something else. So we talked about essence before, which is very, very important. Essence is a very strange thing, as I think Morris said that people can let's say somebody has a stroke or Alzheimer's, and it's but it doesn't matter that his personality has changed, he'll still be Bert. Now, why? How is that? Or if somebody is very, very seriously injured, his whole face is changed, but that will still be Bert. Where is the essence? Where does he stop being Bert? So there's a case which you must probably know, which is the Theseus ship, which is an ancient Greek ship, and it was very famous, etc., etc. And of course, it was made of wood, and the wood kept on deteriorating, and they kept on changing it over and over and over again. It was still Theseus' ship when there was nothing left of the original ship. It was Theseus' ship. Now, how is that? And that's what happens to all of us. We're all changing, apart from the physical, where our cells are changing all the time. But apart from that, where our personality is changing, we are different people in different times, and yet we're still known by our names as whatever our names are. So essence is a problem, and I made a point in my last book about the moving self, that the self is constantly moving. Everything is constantly changing. So if you're looking for yourself, as I said, you won't find it. I mean, where is it? It's continually moving. Now, one problem that we've had all the way through is here, how can we even set out on a discussion about self, myself? How can I talk about I? How can a subjective me talk about I when I'm subjective? It's the thing with a mirror. So so how are we even talking about, how can we hope to find the self? Those of you who wanted to say, tell me what the self is, and that's why I can't. The self is, as soon as you use the word is, you're in trouble, because is static, and we're not. There is nothing that's is. It just isn't. So so basically what we can't do is we can't prove anything from within the system. This is, those of you who know Gödel's incompleteness theorems, where he said that that within the system itself you can't prove consistency, not that way when you're inside, and that's what we're trying to do here. It's an impossibility. So so this is something that we've got to think about. What we're talking about, things that are difficult, and at the end of the day we might not be able to at all, but that's part of what there is. And somebody mentioned Max Tegmark. Who was it? Rebecca, was it you? No. Was it Sana? Okay.
I think it was Mary, and she's not here anymore.
Oh, she's gone. All right, she missed her 15 minutes of glory. Okay, physicist Max Tegmark believes that everything is mathematics, but everything, right? And that mathematics is discovered, not invented. In fact, he says everything is discovered, and that we don't need humans for things to exist. Well, you know what I think of that. But he dismissed the I, even while talking about humans discovering whatever there is. He dismisses the discoverer. I find that amazing, right? So he says that we're made of quarks and electrons, etc. That's what we are. Yet, where are the emotions, and the feelings, the ethics, the love, friendship? Where are they when all we are at the bottom are electrons, etc.? So he says that some questions are legitimate even if there cannot be an answer. That's an interesting one. His example was the question, how many birds are flying in the world at the moment? There's no answer, even though there is a finite answer, but there isn't, because it changes all the time. There is no answer to a legitimate question. In any case, there is no at the moment, which you can read in my book before you get annoyed.
I have to ask to that, is
yes.
there a mathematics to emotion? Because what we're describing now is mathematics to everything that is has some substance, some matter. And the question becomes then, is there some mathematical schematic with, like, there's the fractals and there's some theories around that, right? Is music or, emotion, is there a pattern, some underlying pattern to love, to fear? And I think there have been some studies around that, that there is a pattern, but I don't know a lot about it, but I feel intuitively like that methodology could be also placed somehow. We're probably not there yet in humanity, but I feel like there's probably a lot of patterns to emotions as well.
Frank, you wanted to say something, yes?
Yeah, I'm saying if you ask a genetic scientist about personality, about whether we're fixed or not, he'll say, yeah, because we're created genetically mainly, and in fact you can find virtually every attribute, even emotional attributes, through genes. And therefore, you can be fixed at a certain age, your personality can be fixed at a certain age and not change. And that's why a lot of scientists say by the age of 7, you have shaped your personality. It does not change. What does change is probably your external behavior. But I'm saying, if you're talking philosophically, but if you ask a scientist, as a genetic scientist, he'll give you a scientific answer to the question of who we are and what our selves are.
I don't think a scientific answer is better than a philosophical answer, by the way.
I'm not comparing.
But that's just me.
I'm saying depends who you ask.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. Terry, what do you say? Do you think there's a scientific way of showing emotion? Can it be shown in mathematics? I can't see it, but
I am not aware of any aspect of artificial intelligence literature that addresses directly the biological concept of emotion. There is mimicry, loads and loads of studies about mimicry, about how to mimic an emotion, about how to make a setting. Usually it would just be what you would call a weight, just a priority, and really nothing more. There are an enormous body of literature for understanding emotion, for listening to a phone call and telling if the person's upset. So I think the most accurate answer is that this is just, as in the case of qualia, it is simply something that is not known or understood other than in a very simplistic mimicry fashion that really does not provide any insights as to the patterns or the structures of emotion. There is some observational data about that to understand what kind of state a person is in. But the psychologist would have a better understanding about patterns and relationships between emotions than would cognitive scientists on that point, because it's one of those problems that's still in the future, I think, for cognitive science.
I think this is well. Sorry.
Much help on that.
No. This is where I can mention a particular pet sort of bother of mine regarding a part of philosophy. Yeah. I'm not sympathetic with logical positivism in philosophy, because we're talking about science and getting things down in logical form. Okay, it's a form of philosophy that uses logic to address philosophical issues. Okay, they use this scientific outlook as a way to explain truths in science, and they're ignoring metaphysics as meaningless and simple waffle. So if you can set out emotions, etc., within the logic of language, that seems to satisfy that part of philosophy, and it doesn't satisfy me at all. And now on to history. So history is problematic as far as I'm concerned. Sorry, now I'm gonna insult the next lot of people, and no, seriously, there are problems with history and philosophy and memory, etc., which is all set out in my book, of course. Neil Price, an expert on the Vikings and medieval Scandinavia, shows in his new book that, I quote, "We are almost always looking at the Vikings the wrong way round." He aims to show us these fascinating people as they saw themselves, not as the way they were perceived by those on the sharp end of their robbery. Now, why does that make it more believable? To ask the people who did all that stuff to find the real history that you get from them, rather than looking at them from the outside. How is that better? Historians, go for me.
I'm going to say it's not, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not better. It's just that I think part of what we got to do as historians, and I agree with you, there's problems with history, but I think the problems with history are the exact same problems we've been just talking about with knowledge and language and all the things we've been talking about, this whole time. But I think, that example of the Vikings, The issue is we want to see things from more perspectives, as opposed to, it's not right or wrong perspective. We want to see things from more perspectives so we can get a fuller, more complex way of trying to see the past. And I think this idea that, you know, history is just kind of plucking facts from the past, you know, that's got to go away. And I think a lot of our students still come with that idea that, well, how can you be an historian? Isn't it already all told? But no, there's always new ways of seeing things. There's infinite amounts of knowledge and stories we can tell. There's infinite numbers of ways we can tell those stories. And what we got to do as historians is find the accounts, find the stories that speak to us in the present. Right? What history is not is a catalog of the past. History is a way of trying to better understand who we are in the present. So yeah, I'm not really sympathetic to the idea that, you know, we used to look at things the wrong way. Now we look at things the right way. What I will say is I think we've gotten better at seeing the past in a more complex way than we used to.
So you said something extremely interesting. That comes right back to how I started. You said we look at the past so that we get a better idea in the present, and that of course is
of the present, yeah,
of
who we are in the present, yeah.
And that is problematic, because who we are at the present is a fashion, is the era that we are. And in 10 years' time, then we'll look at history differently. And none of it is, and you will definitely agree with me, I think, is the truth. And it doesn't matter how many different angles you look at it, you won't get the essence of what really happened. You can't. You'll get a lot of different angles, like you get different angles of a cathedral. Right.
No, there is no really happened. There is no, when we try to search for what really happened, we're going to get lost, and it's going to be a failed project, I think. When I say we got to, you know, use history to understand the present, I mean, history's got to be relevant to who we are right now. And I know you're going to question who we are, what that even means, but it's going to be relevant to the discussions we're having at the moment. And that doesn't mean that the history, you know, I tell my students now is going to be irrelevant, you know, in 10 years. It just means that I'm going to present the information in different ways to make it make sense to them better, and allow them to understand their current context better than they maybe do at the time. So it's not, again, not right or wrong, not true or false, but relevance, and an attempt to try to place themselves within a larger context than just individuals living in a society that exists as it does now, with no sense of what happened up to this point. Because, you know, one of the things that happens so readily, I think, when we think, is we make a bunch of assumptions that things are the way they are because it's just the way they are, right? And it's always been that way. And I think what we get across when we do history is, no, it was very different. That humans today are the most bizarre humans that have ever existed. The way we think, the way we act, the way we dress, the way we eat are completely bizarre by any standards of the historical past. But what we do is say, things as they are now is the normal way of being. It's the right way of being. And I think history complicates that, or good history complicates those assumptions and allows us to see the variations that have existed across you know, this kind of deep past.
Yes, that's very interesting. But of course, humans were always the most bizarre things at any time in the past. We just reached this part now, and the ones that are going to come after us are going to be just as bizarre. I mean, more bizarre than we are, if that's at all possible. But I mean, of course, it's possible, because they will be.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a case that, you know, early hunting and gathering societies that exist for 190,000 years of our history look more like other primate societies than we do now, right? It's not normal for primates to live in populations of millions and tens of millions and billions, right? That is a very recent phenomenon that we think of as, this is just the way it is, unless you engage in the history and try to understand the process by which we came to be the species that lives in these massive conglomerations and thinks the way we do and behaves the way we do, and all the rest. So I think there's an increasing weirdness to how humans live, even though we have always been a weird species. I'll grant you that.
We definitely are. We definitely are. Frank, did you want to say something here?
Well, first of all, the very fact that you chose the Vikings is because the Vikings made such an incredible impact in the history of European civilization. And I wonder actually, I agree with a lot of what Josh said. But a true historian who does research knows that he's not going to reach the truth. He knows that he's going to try and get as much to the essence as possible, whatever the essence is. And he does that by using every tool possible, whether it would be textual sources, archaeological sources, oral histories, any source he can use, he'll use in order to put together the puzzle of what actually happened years ago. But we are fortunate to understand through history that people's intellect, mental capacities were different many years ago, that they lived in a different mental capacity, that their appreciation of the environment and of their surroundings was not the way we see the environment and surroundings today. When they heard church bells ringing, when they had rain, tremendous rainfall, when they had drought, their approach to it was completely different from ours today because of their mental construction and because of the fact that many years ago, theology, and the belief in God was completely tied up in a person's way of belief, in the world belief, in what's happening in the world, in what's happening to himself. You couldn't divorce religion in the Western world, Christianity that is, from the actual mental capacity to live, because most people believe that this earth was just a way to the real world. The real world was when we die, and then we either go to hell or we become saved. And people were lived in terror in this world. In other words, everything was completely different. How different it was, well, that's what we're trying to discover. We haven't discovered it exactly to this very day, but we know everything was very different.
Yes, that's very interesting. Okay, so.
If I might say something.
Yes, Augustine.
If I could have the word. Yes, so I would like to say that I agree with Josh. I think that history, that at the end, what we're looking for in history, the whole things about history in university, that actually we try to look the same thing for as many angles as possible, and obviously it helps us and understand the present, because I think the way I understood what Josh said, basically, it's the fallacy of what is natural. The present always looks natural to us, but actually the present is the result of history. And when we look at history, we understand that things are not natural, that things are in this way for a reason, and you can understand the reason. But I would like to go back, Ron, regarding your question of what perspective is better, the perspective of the Vikings, of those who were stuck in the pillage of the Vikings. I think there is an answer to that. Studying political discourses and in political discourses, experts normally make a very meaningful question: is who says that is talking to the people? And in the question on history is who is writing history? And put it in plain terms, the famous sentence that history is actually written by the winners. So probably the winners were not the Vikings. So then it's important to know the point of view of the Vikings, because they were not the winners, and they were put in history in some way. And maybe that's not the right way, that's not the only way. So actually, I think I'm not gonna dare to say that it's better to know their history from their way, but I'm gonna say that at least it's important, because at the end, who wrote the history and the way that history goes, it's not the whole story of it.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Yes, Richard.
When I was a student, I had a little argument with a historian called A.J.P. Taylor, but I'll make the same suggestion that I made to him, that you can actually view history through the myths and the literature better than you can through what people actually wrote about it at the time. In other words, if you read Julius Caesar, you'll get propaganda for Julius Caesar being the greatest general that ever lived. but you won't get history. But if you look at the Vikings myth or the Greek mythology, or you look at some of the drama, then you will understand something about the culture. So literature actually gives you a truer picture of the way people thought of themselves and thought generally than people trying to write history at the time. Of course, as far as we're concerned in Western culture, history actually started with the ancient Greeks, but it wasn't terribly reliable.
You're saying it's more reliable today?
No, I'm saying that it's more reliable to look at the literature and the mythology that they lived by, which is shown to be fiction, than the fiction that people trying to write history back then wrote as history.
That's
because when you're creating something, you're creating something that you expect from your viewpoint. Say you're writing a drama, say you're writing one of the Greek tragedies, then you actually tell us more about what the Greek thought about society than you do if you read someone who is putting forward what they thought. Actually, the Greeks might be a bad idea because they did actually try to put something that was truth. But Herodotus, for instance, put an awful lot of fiction in what he thought was fact, whereas something like, if you want to know what they thought of Agamemnon and what was likely to go on, then you look at the drama. And if you want to know what the Vikings thought, you look at the sagas.
But who's reading that literature and who's going to see those dramas? I still think you're getting a very narrow perspective, and it's generally going to be an elite perspective.
Oh, it will be an elite
what the past was.
I go for that. I tend to feel that to some extent, that's the point that A.J.P. Taylor was criticizing.
Right.
I tend to feel that thought is what guides society forward, and this is per se an elite perspective.
I mean, even the myths, who knows, we get the ones that were eventually written down, but we have no way of knowing if regular people believed in Zeus. I was talking to a ancient Chinese historian a little bit ago, and there's this big thing in China about ancestor worship, and supposedly ancestor worship is this belief that goes deep into the Chinese past. And he says, read Confucius. He doesn't mention an ancestor once in the Analects. He doesn't even mention a grandfather once in the Analects. Right? It's all about the immediate family. And so this idea that this is something that people had a deep, reverence for is just something made up, probably in the last few hundred years of Chinese history. And what we're really seeing is this maybe obsession of a very tiny elite in connecting with their ancestors that then just gets blown up and applied to the entire, quote unquote, whatever, Chinese culture is, whatever Chinese civilization is. But we've now made this huge, generalization about belief when it really was 6 people who believed in that thing, and it just happened to get written down and passed on to us.
That's very, very, very interesting. Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you.
My own take is that you should take in the myths, the literature, the history, and every source possible in order to try to get to a picture. They all give you something. Even people say that within the myths themselves, there are grains of truth. The myths aren't completely without truth. We do not know exactly where the truth lies, but if you take parallel sources and you take the literature and the other historical sources, you'll get to the truth. Okay? But you've got to give credit to the original Greek historians such as Herodotus and Thucydides, who really made the first attempt to give some sort of objective approach to history, although it was very subjective, of course, but they made their first attempt to write history. And if you take their sources and you put together the Greek literature and the Greek stories and the mythology, then you're going to get a much wider spectrum of what actually happened, and that's the way to do it.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Dear Debbie, yes.
I wanted to see the whole connection of taking history with what's been discussed now. Josh was saying about the aim or what history does, and connecting it to the self when you asked what is the essence of self, or what the questions of trying to get to the bottom of self. And I was trying, it seemed that the connection when Josh was describing history as narratives of the way to explain how the past history of past events in connection to the now is something that is relevant, something that can explain who we are now, I think, and the terms truth, what is the true self, or what is the true history, or objectiveness, and all these terms maybe are not also practical when trying to answer what the self is. And perhaps as we try to see history in a broader connection and trying to see how it can explain who we are now, how things are, how civilization or society is at these times, perhaps we could see the same as the self within the context of society, the context of humanity, and not only what is the essence of me, but what am I within the context of humanity? What is the aim, or how am I relevant to society as responsible to the other, if talking about responsibility, or in relation to the other that we spoke about last time. So you can't really, or it would be perhaps quite not sufficient to just look at what the self is without looking at the broad connection of society, like going back to history and just perhaps dissecting one part of history without trying to see how it is relevant to us now. The function of religion, or if religion was very important until the Enlightenment, how is it important or not, or functional nowadays? Should creationism be as a valid theory like science? Should it be taught as a valid explanation to how the world was created? I think it shouldn't, because I think it's not practical, because it cannot explain, we cannot expand and give other narratives to humanity, to how we are within society, within civilization, within history, within advancement. And so my point is perhaps that we don't ask the questions of objectivity and truth. Perhaps the questions should be, or the answers, or the focus should be about relevance, practicality, ethical responsibility, also within history explanations, and the self. That's it.
Yep, very nice. I got loads more, but I want to sort of wrap up something now, which I'm going to unveil now, possibly for the first time. But so the self. There are two ways, as far as I can see, that we can look at it. All right, we can look at the I as that thing, and then we can look at, which is a subject, and we can look at me, which is the object of I. All right, and it's the me that goes out into the world and reacts with other me's, etc. But I discarded that as not. It doesn't mean that much, and I've gone into something else which is more connected to science, and I've tried to make a connection. I'm saying that I, and I alluded to that before, I is not a point as such, but it's a smudged and smeared blur that spreads and changes, right? It can never encounter anything that's not approximate, because it's smudged. All right, it is continuous spread along our inherent character that interacts with what it perceives. Now, I'm trying to make that clear. Instances of time are not point-like, and this is the main part of my last book, that of the moving now, that there is no such thing as now here, but it's moving. It's always moving back, and it's spread over a continuum that's continuously moving. So I is unmeasurable as a point that is a theoretical absolute, and in fact is meaningless. Now, if you look in terms of quantum physics, okay, certainty is never anything more, I'm sorry about the technicality here, but anything more than averaging a very large number of individually very blurry examples of it over time. There's no point. There's nothing you can measure. There's nothing you can touch. Okay, what we feel as certainty is simply an average of what is perceived over time. And now, what I've done here, I've taken quantum physics and I've moved it into and applied it to philosophy, because I can't see, I can see it makes sense regarding an I that we can't get hold of or ever measure it. Right? Is everybody with me? So,
Ron, can I ask you a quick question?
I'm not sure I can answer them if you ask it, but go on.
Well, you mentioned about the averaging in quantum mechanics, and I just wanted to make the quick point, just for clarity, that for instance, if you do the diffraction experiment, the classic two-slit diffraction experiment with electrons, where the electron seems to go through both sides, it is absolutely true that the average shows that it goes through both sides, and that if you don't look at it, it goes through both. Nonetheless, at the end, you do get an electron. You do get an actual result. So in that sense, the average part comes from many, many different trials. But at the same time, there is an observable thing where I, as an observer, will see and say, oh, that's where the electron landed. So that is an event. That's not a probability there. That is an actual occurrence. The mystery comes in when we see a whole bunch of those, and then we say, how in the world did that happen? Or why did that happen that way? And also on the individual ones, you can say like it shouldn't have landed there. But I just want to make a clarification. You do get actual outcomes for quantum tests. That is by the nature of the beast. So you get a definitive, yes, I did see it. Yes, I didn't. No, I didn't see it. But then the probability comes in more on the why of how they did all those individual events. So it doesn't stay blurry in that sense that it's always a blur. It's not a blur when you actually see the electron. You do see the electron.
Except, yes, true. Except that you won't be able to, only when you try and measure it that you can actually find it.
Right. And that's where it gets very strange, because if you don't measure it, then that has perplexed a century's worth of scientists to no end, and philosophers and general media, and take your choice. Because in that part, yes, it does not work the way people expect it to. It's not explicable in an ordinary way. And it's very strange.
That to me aligns with relevance, because you can only see it if it stops, you see it. When you're not looking at it, it's moving. That's relativism. It's still there and it's moving, but it's relative. When I look at it, it stops. So it's the same particle that is solid form, and when I'm looking at it, but when I'm not looking at it, it's moving.
The remarkable thing about it is it's actually an incredibly simple rule. as long as no one, it can't just be you, as long as no one in the universe knows which way that thing moved, then all possible histories exist. The final history is not determined, not just where it's at, the entire history. This is something that I'm rather adamant about, that you have to, if you go through the math, it's not just where you find it. The actual history comes into reality when you do the trick of actually looking at it and say, I wish to look at it, and I find it. At that point, not only just where you found it, but where it came from, where it went, what filter it went through, all of that suddenly becomes real. And by definition, until you do, if there was any history where someone knew that ahead of time, that doesn't happen. And when I say it doesn't happen, I mean it actually changes the outcome. I mean, either the electron's there or it's not there. So it's a stark difference that you have to be completely ignorant, totally ignorant about what happened in the past. Everyone. There can be no trace of it anywhere in the universe. That's what makes it in quantum. It is actually one way to define quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is the physics of that which we do not know, period. When you know it, it becomes class.
I'm afraid I've got to go. So it's been really nice. I'm glad to have met you all, and I look forward to the next meeting. I'm sorry, Ron.
No, I understand it's late, and terrific.
My wife's got dinner ready and she's been waiting for over an hour.
I'm very pleased you came, Richard. I'm very pleased. I'll see you next time.
Lovely meeting all of you.
Terrific. We're going to end in a few minutes. Bill, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I wanted to ask a question. The idea of a smear or a blur, my awareness as I go through life is like an evolving frame of reference. It's constantly changing. It's coming up with new interpretations, new plot lines, new understandings. And I don't ever see it as a fixed point. I see it as continuing evolution. Is that consistent with what you're describing?
Yes, I think it is. Yes, definitely. I don't think we ever see anything still. I mean, we think we do, but it's gone. It's gone. I mean, when we look at it, it's already the past. We're looking on the next thing that's moving past us. Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, but I mean, the idea being that maybe today it's an adventure story, tomorrow it's a context story, and sometimes the story is going to change over time, and we're going to replace this plot line again and again. I think that's particularly true of history. No? Maybe I'm transgressing here. The idea that history is a storyline that historians interpret the world with, right? Is that wrong or right?
Say it again.
Plot lines are the tools for historical interpretation. And they can be tragedies, they can be comedies, they can be ironies, they can be anything.
That's Hayden White.
I picked up from a guy named Hayden White. I don't know.
Yeah. Hayden, that's Hayden White's. I think there's truth. I think there's something to that. I think there's probably more to it. I mean, I think that awareness is whether or not people believe Hayden White, that it's all about, he calls it implotment. That we tell these stories in the way that we're used to telling stories, which is tragedy and comedy and whatever else. I don't know if that's inherently true, but I think once Hayden White pointed that out, it made us as historians more aware of what we're doing when we do histories, and to try to do things other than just pure narrative, which has so many limitations and does tend to fall into these traps of that implotment. Like, I'm just going to find these points that make this story a tragedy. I'm going to find these points that make this story, whatever other narrative form you want to call it. I don't though think. I think there is something to being aware of the danger of doing that, and then trying to tell stories that don't fit that implotment, if that makes sense.
Is that an issue of the self is the question.
Oh, the self? I don't know. I'm not a philosopher enough to talk about the self, I guess.
Gosh, is there really?
I want to.
Gosh, is there really such a thing as a pure narrative to begin with?
No, there isn't. I think the narrative is the way we have chosen to construct our histories, and it's inherently flawed. I think that we can only think in terms of these narratives. So when I was talking earlier about trying to make a more complex history, I think part of that is getting rid of the purely storytelling aspect of history, which is, that's what people want to hear. That's the books that sell are the best narratives. Students connect to narratives. So it's, as long as we understand narrative as a tool and not what actually happened, I think it's okay. But we do need to be aware that the project of turning this, this immense amount of information into narratives is in itself is constructing history as opposed to representing history.
And I would add in from the viewpoint a bit from computers and artificial intelligence that is a necessity that we must be aware of, because all models of what happened in the past are just that. Model.
If you perfectly represent history, you're just duplicating chaos.
About enormous, gigantic, unbelievable swaths of information. Sorry, didn't quite hear you.
Mark, didn't hear you.
Oh, I just said that, in response to what Josh was saying, that if you represent history accurately rather than present it in the form of narrative, that's more comprehensible and understandable and able to be absorbed, then you're just simply sort of replicating the chaos that is the stuff out of which history emerges. You don't want to replicate chaos and then teach it in schools, because you're not going to be able to pass it on. I'm just thinking that my understanding of history, you have to make some kind of sense of it, and some kind of narrative is going to be, some kind of implotment, I suppose, is going to be necessary if it's going to be more useful as a learning tool. Oh, I'm just.
No, I think you're. I mean, that's a big conversation. I think that's absolutely right, though, is that there is that challenge of understanding history as just this chaotic collection of infinite amounts of knowledge, and then actually needing to be able to express something to students in the classroom and in a book or whatever else. And I think that's part of why these narratives get stuck, in our schools and in our brains, is because we tend to just go to the simplest version of these stories, the ones that we can get across quickly in a classroom. And it can be hard, for classroom teachers of history to integrate new research, new ideas in, because it tends to take our nice, neat narratives and then complicate them in ways that makes it extremely difficult to get across in a, hour and 20-minute lecture or in a week of class, something like that. So, I mean, that's the function of narrative. That's the crutch of narrative, is that it allows us to get across complicated ideas in a way that humans are used to digesting, right? We're storytelling animals ultimately. So we do like those stories, but we have to understand the stories aren't truth. They're constructs of our brains and our means of imparting knowledge.
I would like to
on that particular point.
I would like to sort of
go on,
come to an end, sort of, by saying how much I appreciate what happens here, because I get a lot out of it. Very, very often somebody says something that sticks in my mind, and it was Terry who said that there was a few words he said, and it stuck with me. We were talking about statues and troubles, etc., etc. And Terry went into a very nice talk, and at the end he said, "We can do better," and those words struck me, and they stayed with me, because it was wonderful. We can do better, and I thought about it, and but of course, being me, I had to tear it to pieces a bit, because we can do better, but then we're in the we, right? And I try to understand what that could mean if I say that there's only I. Where does the we come in? I think it's what Debbie was alluding to, the point that that the I and the we, and I'm worried. I don't understand how they come together, and I thought about this. If Terry says we can do better, and we all agreed, every single person here agreed, and we're all different eyes. Now, how is it that we agree to that if we're all different eyes? There must be something common to us, to the people that were in that particular Zoom meeting. So I thought of we being a collective would be I and I and I and I, all the different I's, right? But how does that work? I can't add anything to I, so that would mean moving out of myself to put another I to it. And I was trying to work out how that works with how I conceive of the world. And what I came up with was the blurry I that I mentioned, this spread out thing. And if you can think of sets that we talked about last week, sets, which if you have a minute, I would just like to show you, just for example, just to give you an example. If this is I, and this is another I, and this is another I, but they intersect. Now, where they intersect would be where something that appeals to me that is connected with my I, right? And if I look at this, which is a bit more complex, if this is I, and this is another I, etc. I have where these intersect, we agree. When Terry said we can do better, all this bit agreed. But not everybody would agree with what better means. If we had people from another group who said, no, we can do better by doing what we think is absolutely terrible, what they think is great, they would be here. And these do not intersect. So these are the different I's that appeal, that compare what we feel. They make sense. This and this will never make sense. Never. They're in different sets, and there's no way I can put that with that. And that solved some sort of it solved some sort of problem that I've had for a long time, and spoken with some people. I thought it was psychology, but now I'm not so sure. The fact is that when each of us has a tremendous rational argument, we thought, this can't fail. I'm now gonna put my logic and my rationale. Somebody tells me about these conspiracy theories, and I'm now going to put it down. This he will understand, right? And I put it down, and it's brilliant. But the person does not understand it. He said, no. He says, no. He says, that's not at all. I thought, how can he say that? This is so clear. But this is my set, and it's clear to me, but his set is just not connected with me. And I'm trying to find, for years, trying to find a way to make a rational argument that is so clear to me. How is it not clear to everybody? How? And what I've come up with is that there's no connection, and there's no way I can convince somebody of what I consider to be rational, which is in my set of beliefs or whatever you want to call them. When somebody's got another set, there's no way I will ever get through. I thought it was psychology. It's not. There's something happening here that I don't understand. It is very depressing.
Have you tried force?
Yes. Didn't work. I mean, it could work, but actually, I'm not that sort of...
Then try more force.
There are so many examples of people influencing other people and changing them dramatically in their lives. So there's so many practical examples of that.
Yeah, but what is the actual mechanism? What's the actual what's going on there? It's a great mystery. It's a great interest to me as to what happens when we change someone's mind or when we convince somebody of something. We would take it for granted that we can prick someone's conscience or something like that to make them behave in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have done if we negotiate something. I think there's something else going on. I think it could be something quite different. I'm thinking that people have either do or do not have a potential for comprehending, but they have no comprehension whatsoever to begin with, let's say. They have a potential for comprehension, and that potential can be worked upon in order to have them comprehend. and then they can become convinced or persuaded. Something like that. Where the potential is something far less than what we think it to be. We think that people have got consciences, people have got beliefs, they've got all this stuff going on in their minds already that we can sort of wake them up to. I think we create it on the spot every time. That's what I think.
Yes, we can change people's mind, but it's actually quite rare. Think of it. Think of when you talk to people, how many times you can change somebody's mind. It's rare. I mean, isn't it?
Well, I think as philosophers, part of what we need to bring is this open mind and an ability to change and grow our thoughts. Otherwise, I don't think someone can rationally call themselves a philosopher, really. And even saying that is too pointed to even say, because that's not open-minded. But that piece of free thinking has to exist with this this philosophical thinking, or we shouldn't even be really allowing ourselves to participate. Because when we start just defining ourselves in terms of absolutism, or I can't expand my thoughts, then it's really not beneficial to ourselves and to the world as a whole. I think for humans to grow together, we have to get off of our high horses and be open to additional ways of thinking.
Rebecca, have you spoken to one of these conspiracy theorists?
Oh, I am one on some days.
Oh dear. A conspiracy theorist will tell you that we are not open-minded. If we'd be open-minded, if we'd go to Google and Google it and do our research, then we would understand, because we are not open-minded. They are. So that is open-minded. It's very subjective.
But they are correct in some sense, because when we want to change others, that means we have monopoly over the truth, because our vision is the true vision and we want others to adopt it. And it comes from a narcissistic self of I, like I want to see the world in a vision that resembles me. Even when you talked about all the eyes you had in the meeting together, those eyes, they resembles you because they have similar ideologies, and so we get along with people who have more percentage of what we have already. That's why we pick friends over others, because we use the phrase we have more in common. So it's not about the others, it's about us. We want to see us in the others, in the partner, in the friend, and when they're not, because they don't resemble us, we reject them and we want to change them. So if we are truly open-minded, we have to accept ourselves as agnostics to the truth, because we're searching for it, we don't have the absolute truth, and accept others as also on their quest to find the truth. Some people take detours, and those detours might send them somewhere else that is even more truthful than our truth. So, and how can we, if everybody thinks like us, the entire world will not change. I don't want to see a world that looks like me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with that. In terms of that, that conspiracy people, they at least let us put the doubts in what we consider an absolute truth. We always should have a bit of doubt in everything we believe, at least, because that's the way we change things. I'm thinking, Ron, I've loved your theory about the self, and I understood really when I saw the picture of the Sept, and I was thinking that I think it's Daniel Dennett that has the theory of the extended mind, and from my point of view, it's the one that adjusts better to the idea of the I, on the extended mind, and that's the idea of that my mind is not confined only within my body, but also that my ideas are in other people's minds, and that's why they are the same mental processes, and that's why I can change. I can understand with a second. I can change ideas with other people, and that is also called in neurosciences functionalism. The idea that we have the same function, in our mental processes, we maybe have different, but they are the same functionalism. And that is,
Yeah, and if you look at people who changed human history, they were people who came up with different ideas than the norms, the accepted norms, the groups think. So if we fight every person, if we fight every person that says I have a different idea because it's different than ours, then there is no progress in humanity.
But is it because it's different from ours, or is it because it's away from reason, away from logic, away from, isn't there, scientists and philosophers, I assume philosophers, have to believe that there's some progress that can be made in inquiry, in what's the point of trying to understand and examine the world if ultimately you're only trying to do it in terms of satisfying your own egocentric sense of reality? That's not good. Surely there are people who care about finding reality and truth. I think truth is the philosopher's domain, and reality is the scientist's domain, or whatever. But surely that's the direction we want to go. Or do we just want to say, let's get along, hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and you can believe the world is flat, and I can say, smile at you and say, well, maybe it is, maybe it's not. I think it's round. No. We can resolve the issue. If we can't, we really should.
Well, I agree with you 100%, but the problem is we're basing our reasoning on science, and science has so many limitations right now. We don't have the absolute science. Like, we don't have concrete science. We have some concrete science, but we don't have absolute concrete science. So it's kind of like, give me a lever and it can move the world, but we don't have that lever that moves the world. We don't.
Very sympathetic to what you've said. Very sympathetic to what you have said. But I would have to I would have to argue with you about it from a contrary perspective. But I'm very sympathetic with what you said, nevertheless.
Well, and for me personally, there's so many times where people have said to me, "Do you really think that?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I'm just processing information out loud." And that's the way my, literally, like, that's an extrovert personality is really defined as I'm saying things as I'm thinking through them. I haven't come to any conclusion, so people can be like, what did you just say? And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't really mean that. I'm just like actually processing this out loud with you. And so I think also, there's a jump to conclusion to be like, she must think that way, or he must think that way. When usually I think generally people are just trying to understand information, and we all do that in very different ways.
Yes, we do. We must. There's no way for it to be other than in different ways, because we are different people with different experiences and different ways of comprehending the world. We must, and it cannot be the case other than that we will be in conflict at some intellectual levels at some point, some point. Yeah.
So all I can say is 2 quotes. One is from Socrates again. He says that comes with what we've just been talking about. True wisdom comes to each of us when we realize how little we understand about life, ourselves, and the world around us. That's what we've got to realize, how little we know, right? And another one from Václav Havel, who said, keep the company of those who seek the truth, run from those who have found it. So, I run from anybody who tells me they know the truth, they found the truth. I really, really run from them. And but anyway, but here we think together, and I think something comes out of it. At least we get different perspectives, and doors open and doors close, and we get. And I think I always get something out of it. I hope that all of you will join me again the next first Sunday of the month, and I will send invitations out. And I look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, thank you very, very much for coming. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah,
Nice to meet
and
you
you
all.
as well. It was great. Thank you.
All the
Thank you.
best.
Have a good month, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
All the best.
Bye. Bye.